Ben Rhodes, it is the portrait of the most heinous echo in human history. You heard Linda Thomas Greenfield make that reference, as well as President Zelensky. And it's really over to the Western world. What do we do now?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely heinous. And look, when you look at the combination of the horrible war crimes that we're discovering, the stated purpose of denazification and demilitarization, and some articles in Russian state media that talk about the need to eliminate Ukraine, we might not just be talking about war crimes, Nicole. I mean, this is rising to the potential level of consideration of genocide, trying to eliminate the Ukrainians as a people through violence, through deportations, and through political measures. That's the severity of this. I think at a minimum, you have to start looking at additional sanctions. It's just not morally tenable to continue to buy significant amounts of Russian gas, as Europe does every day. I hope coal and oil are just the beginning. They're going to have to take some pain in Europe to really cut off Russia from its lifeline of revenue, which is that sale and export of gas. I think the kinds of restrictions, perhaps self-imposed restrictions that have been applied on the provision of weapons to Ukraine, those things should be rethought and should probably go away. It's time to give Ukraine everything it needs to fight. I understand the reticence to get into a direct military conflict between NATO and Russia, but I think the urgency of the provision of weapons to Ukraine goes up. And then the other thing I'd put out there, Nicole, that's a longer-term issue, the UN is totally broken, as President Zelensky highlighted. This war was launched while Russia chaired the Security Council. Ukraine had to call an emergency meeting of a council chaired by Russia when Russia invaded them. Russia can veto anything that the Security Council would choose to do about these war crimes. The international order has been broken by Vladimir Putin, and it's really time for the United States and other countries to think about how it can be reformed to diminish Russia's power to obstruct any mode of accountability going forward.
Well, let me just press you, Ben Rhodes, because by the time the UN gets around to reforming themselves, all they're going to be able to do is build monuments to dead Ukrainian children. What do we do now?
Well, no, that's why I said, Nicole, very clearly, that's a longer-term piece of business. It will take a long time. Right now, I think you're talking about moving from sanctions to trying to totally cut Russia off from any revenue and capacity to access significant revenue to finance their war machine. And I think you're beginning to look at the provision of things like tanks and planes and the kinds of weapons, heavier weapons, that there's been a reticence to provide to Ukraine. I think those are the ways to maximize the existing strategy of sanctions and arming Ukrainians to fight back. And I think we have to extend the boundaries of that policy in the short term, even as we're going to have to reckon with the longer term issues around how Russia has been able to so neuter the international community's response to hold them accountable.
Helene, I think some Ukrainians that we have access to believe this is a moment when all humans will have to answer to their children and grandchildren, what did you do? As Ukrainian civilians were slaughtered in Bucha and the world saw the images and heard the stories, what did you do? When the mayors of Mariupol came up and said, hundreds were slaughtered here too, what did you do? How does that question weigh on people at the Pentagon? And I have to ask you this too. When we talk about more sanctions and more weapons, I always want to ask, what have we held back? On the military side, what have we held back?
Hi, Nicole. I think the Pentagon still is looking at this through the prism of their first job is to protect American life and to keep America out of a war with Russia. For more than a month now, even before Russia invaded Ukraine, Pentagon officials were warning that this was going to get very, very bad. General Mark Milley, the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, went to the Hill with Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary, in February, in the weeks before the invasion, and said, once Russian troops get in, you prepare for a humanitarian catastrophe. This is going to get ugly, and it's getting ugly, and it will get ugly, stay ugly for a very long time. And even then, they were saying, though, at the same time, that the United States has to take pains to make sure that the U.S. does not end up in war with a nuclear-armed Russia. So now here we are at this point where we're seeing these horrific atrocities live on TV in a way that these sorts of atrocities have never been broadcast before, because we now live in the type of cell phone video age where everything is out there for public consumption. And the question becomes then, what are we going to do? At the Pentagon, the answer is the same as it was a month ago. We should be arming the Ukrainians. We should be helping them as much as we possibly can. But there are some lines that Pentagon officials still say they don't want to see the United States crossing, particularly given that, it ends up as this ends up in the lap of President Biden, who has made clear that he doesn't want to see the U.S. going to war with Russia. So I think you will be seeing more weaponry going over. This tank thing now. Last Friday, the United States started working with a couple of allies, one of them being Poland, to transfer S-72, T-72 tanks, Soviet-era tanks, to the Ukrainians for them to use in the battle that's coming in the east and in the Donbass region. The Poles don't want to talk about this. We reported on this last Friday. The allies themselves who are transferring these tanks don't want to publicize this, because this is in case Russia views this as belligerent. You can argue whether a tank in your own country is an offensive or defensive weapon. Russia will certainly argue that it's an offensive weapon. But we're seeing a lot more now going. We've lost the whole argument about defensive, in some ways about defensive versus offensive weapons when we're giving stuff to the Ukraine or to Ukraine, or when we're sending things over there. But it's still, at the moment, it's still in the same realm of anti-tank, anti-aircraft, helping them with their air defense systems, and that sort of thing. You haven't seen the big, the next big step of talking about establishing humanitarian corridors, and which is something that the United States could do, that's short of, a no-fly zone. But you're not seeing administration arrive at that point yet.
Helene, I want to play that sound you talked about. This is this is Secretary Austin warning about things getting worse.
The Russians thought that they could very quickly move into Ukraine, capture the capital city, and install their leader of choice, and they weren't able to do that. As they enter this phase, it will probably be a lot more deliberate. They'll be able to mass fires a lot more, and so the violence will probably go up in a notch there.
And as you said, General Milley also sending the public message that things are about to get worse. What is the amount or the proportion of what we've held back? Colonel Vindman weeks ago was talking about sort of a patriarchal approach to the systems that we give the Ukrainians. I think they've heard the message loud and clear that we will not be patrolling the skies above Ukraine. But what is the delta between what they want and what we've given so far? How much room is there between that wish list and what we haven't given but are considering giving?
It's such a good question, and it's one that the Biden administration gets very defensive about, because they would like for us to believe, and they want the world to believe, that we're giving, that weapons are flowing, and they are flowing. Weapons are coming with speed, and we're giving. One of the things the U.S. official said to me last Friday when he was talking to me about this tank story was that we have now given, he said, Zelensky everything that he's asked for, except for, and I said, except for the MiGs, and he's like kind of laughed and said, yeah, except for the MiGs. There is plenty more that we could do when it comes to probably speed, but the delineation for them, for the Pentagon, is what they classify as offensive weaponry versus defensive weaponry. I think you're going to see that. You're going to see those lines go away now. I think as going to soon see now that nobody's going to start, nobody's going to continue this ridiculous charade of pretending that we can't give Ukraine anything that could end up striking Russia. That's the I don't want to use the word red line, but that is what the United States has been worried about so far. That's what they were worried about with the MiGs. That's what they were worried about. They want to make sure that any of the weaponry that we give Ukraine cannot be used inside Russia, cannot be used to threaten Moscow, can't be used in a way that Vladimir Putin can then say, you know, his existence is at stake, because then at that point, you don't know what he's going to do and how he's going to respond. But it's such a tricky balance to walk when you see the kind of slaughter that we're seeing in Bucha and in you know, Mykolaiv and in Mariupol and in these areas that have fought so valiantly. But at the same time, we've seen citizens, Ukrainian people, who it just really looks as if Russia has made a decision now that not being able to defeat the Ukrainian military on the battlefield is then going to do everything it can to break the will of the Ukrainian people themselves to fight. And that's sort of where we seem to be shifting now. And that's a very, very scary place to be.